Ladies and gentlemen, this is Nate Crespo, your host for today and forever, and welcome back to another episode of the Lawyers in the Making podcast, where it is my job to focus on the unique journeys to the law and law school of professionals in the legal field and law students. Let's talk about what we're doing today, because today we have another spectacular guest. He's a University of Illinois Chicago School of Law graduate and currently works as the founder of Freshwater Counsel and as an advisor at Briefly. He's held past positions as a managing director at Whistler Partners and as an attorney at Goodwin. Finally, he is the host of his very own podcast, Khurram's Quorum. I love that name, by the way. Excited to have him on the podcast today, Mr. Khurram Naik. Welcome to the podcast. How are we doing today?
Before going any further, I'd like to say a quick word about the sponsor of this podcast, Rhetoric. Back in episode 25, I had the privilege of having the CEO, Luke Yingling, on the podcast, and ever since that episode, fell in love with the product. Rhetoric takes user briefs and motions and compares them against the text of opinions written by judges to identify ways to tailor their arguments to better persuade the judges handling their cases. Rhetoric's focus on persuasion and helps users find new ways to improve their odds of success through more persuasive arguments. Know more, win more. I was able to see a demo of the product, and its cutting-edge technology and fascinating features make for a product I am proud to sponsor, and further shows the new digital era the field of law has been entering thus far on my journey doing this podcast. If you decide to book a demo, let them know Nate sent you. Be sure to check them out in the show notes below or at userhetoric.com. One word, userhetoric.com. Now, back to the show.
It's one of the most unique I've ever seen in my entire life. You had graduated in 2003 from Carnegie Mellon University in biology and psychology. You actually then went on, you were at Northwestern University, you were an MCAT instructor for those years in between. You actually had two separate papers that you actually did research for. I wrote them down. A chimera analyst of Preston knockout mice. I had no idea what that is, but I was infatuated by it. And as well, EHD4 and CDH23 are interacting partners in cochlear hair cells. I probably butchered all of that, but it's inspiring because you then went to law school. So, Khurram, simply put, why'd you go to law school in the first place? How did you find yourself in a law school classroom all those years later?
I definitely didn't expect to go to law school. Although I will say, surprisingly, my dad, he actually, it's kind of an interesting story, but in brief, he wrote software for lawyers. This is in the early 90s for personal injury lawyers and bankruptcy lawyers to manage their dockets. So I had exposure to lawyers at a young age. I would go to law firm offices. But in a very typical fashion, my parents are, they're Asian, and so they really encouraged me to become a physician. I don't think they ever mentioned law. So I ended up going to college to focus on becoming a physician. And so then along the way, I realized, hey, look, that's my parents' dream, not mine. And so then that's what the research stints were, to figure out, okay, what to do from here. And I had some interesting experiences. So I had these very academic experiences in academia. And then I also had experiences that were very much what I would say in the real world, which was I worked on a political campaign. So there's two phases to that. One was fundraising. So I was on the street knocking on doors, asking total strangers for money for a political cause. And then I was also in a get out the vote operation, which involved managing volunteers to get out the vote in their own neighborhoods. So those are very people-facing jobs in ways. It was just a complete departure from sitting in a lab sometimes in a literal basement. And then I also worked my stint in finance. I was a futures broker in Chicago. That's when I moved to Chicago to take on that role. I knew nothing about finance, but I knew there's something called the futures market, and it had some role in the economy. And so I just want to learn by jumping into it. And so that was very much a retail customer-facing job as well. So I had these very different experiences where I really valued my time in academia. It's a wonderful environment to sit and think, and just create work product from your mind. It's remarkable. And then also I really enjoyed these very hands-on experiences in my exposure to finance. And I knew I would make money. So when I thought about, okay, what's my end game here? Am I really going to get a PhD? I tried a couple of years to apply for programs, didn't get in, probably because I had poor grades in college. So then I said, okay, well then I think I need to find something that's at the intersection of these real world interests in academia. And so I thought about business school, I thought about law school. It was a tough call, but in balance, law won out.
So let's talk about law school. That first year of law school, all the way back, 2010, University of Illinois, Chicago School of Law. Get in there. Your first year of law school. People hate it. People love it. People have came on this podcast have been like, it's my favorite year of my life. I never had so much fun. How was it for you?
Let's see. So I was self-conscious being 28 and some of my peers are like 22, which now looking back is pretty laughable because it's not really that huge of a difference. It's definitely a meaningful difference, but so I was a little self-conscious for that heading in. And my first semester, I remember like in the first few weeks, I was just very much like almost literally eyes forward. I was like sitting in the front, eyes forward. And because I could tell that a lot of people were very excited, emotional, and maybe being a little bit dramatic. And so it's like, okay, I don't want to get swept into this drama. I'm just going to be eyes forward, very focused. And that wasn't any fun. So I was like, okay, I'm going to, figuratively speaking, turn to my neighbors and get to know people. And I realized there's plenty of ways to be social without getting swept into, kind of an emotional approach to law school. It was, I mean, I remember the first semester was so exciting because it was at my college. I went to a technical college, which had a wide range of students. There's people who came, there was like, we had a drama school that's very well known. And so there's definitely like a significant range of students, but everyone was, I would say, largely speaking, people were pretty similar, more similar than different. In law school, I found people with a very wide range. So I went to what was then the John Marshall Law School, which had probably the most relaxed admissions policy. And so there was a broad range of people who broke into law school. And it was definitely eye-opening and humbling to, I thought of myself as this, I thought it was just gonna be so brilliant. And I'm just gonna like, just totally dominate this law school. I'm so smart, so hardworking. And it was very humbling to see people that I didn't regard as particularly driven or honestly particularly smart, totally kick my ass in law school. And I realized there were some huge gaps in my skill set. So I went to law school on a full merit scholarship, and that was contingent on staying in the top third of law school. And after that first semester, I was in the 34th percentile. And so not only did I not do well, I was at risk of losing the scholarship. And that was the reason why I went to law school to begin with. I guess I should mention on that scholarship point, I think I find it important to talk about that decision to enter law school to begin with. So I applied, I knew that I wanted to be in Chicago, and I applied to a number of law schools there, as well as University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, which is some distance away from Chicago. And Urbana-Champaign is a really strong state law school. They have strong placement at big firms, and that was my goal. So I had a partial scholarship to University of Illinois Chicago. I already had in-state tuition, so it was very affordable to go there. And Urbana-Champaign is an affordable place to live as well. And so that was my one strong option. And then the other strong option was I had this full merit scholarship. And I applied to John Marshall Law School weeks after I applied to everyone else. It was kind of on a whim. I said, why not? Maybe they'll give me a full scholarship. And then I think maybe a week later, they sent me back a letter saying, yes, we're giving you a full scholarship. So I was just like so full of myself, thought like, oh, I'm a genius. This is, of course they recognize my value. I got into law school got that scholarship most likely because although I had very poor grades at a 2.71 GPA, I had a high LSAT score. And so that was probably a valuable asset for the law school, and they recognized that. So that's the backdrop where, the decision that I was faced with even entering law school to begin with, and which of these two to pick. And what I banked on was I said to myself, well, from some of these prior experiences, I know how to reach out to professionals. In key part, I volunteered for my college alumni program as president of the local alumni chapter. And I didn't know anything about communication with professionals when I started that. I literally didn't even know how to draft a professional email. No clue. And I was fortunate to have some great mentors and past presidents who were great at coaching me. From that experience, I learned how to reach out to white collar professionals. Um, and so then on that basis, the tiebreaker between the full merit scholarship and the partial scholarship to let's say a better ranked law school, I bet on myself to say, hey, you know what, I'll be in Chicago, I'll be right across from the federal court, I'll have plenty of exposure to professionals. I'm banking on my ability to build my own network in the way that I've started to, but I'll be that's a bet that I'm making. So that's the backdrop for why I chose that law school to begin with. Um, but my confidence, my skill set was of having strong grades was a little misplaced. Clearly, just the skill set of writing in law school was very different than the kind of writing that I had exposure to. And I've never been a careful reader. That's never been a strength of mine. And of course, that's pretty important for a lawyer. So yeah, my first year was definitely very hard, but I had so much fun with my classmates. Like I still laugh at the things my classmates and I would talk about. I it was the socializing time and the time that we're all immersed together in this common experience was amazing and unfortunately hard to replicate. And I think on that basis alone, when some people ask whether they should go to law school, I think just that experience is inherently valuable enough that I think it's worth experiencing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree enough. Usually those experiences we have and we remember them forever are usually the best sort of experiences you can ever have in your life because you remember it forever. They're with you forever. They become a part of you. But I have to ask, since we have such a unique journey here, since it was 7 year gap between graduating college and then coming to law school. So how did being in academia, working as a futures broker, working as an MCAT instructor, how did those shape your perspective and experience throughout law school?
Yeah, great question. I'll try to think about things I learned from each of those experiences. So from working as in that political campaign, I learned to be fearless. I mean, so the skill set that I mentioned of the networking, that built upon that experience because I would be doing cold calls, both for the fundraising part and then also for the seeking volunteers part and knocking in doors. And so I was just this like 21-year-old in jeans and a t-shirt, knocking on, $1 million plus houses, asking for hundreds of dollars of donations. And I learned to be very bold. I learned to be very direct. We were given a script, which is understandable because this is this huge national organization. They want things to be standardized. They want people going off, and saying crazy things. It was a heated political time. And so at first I lit the script. I'm like, okay, I can understand why they're saying these things. I just feel like there's a better way to get to know people. So then I started to adapt and improvise. I had kind of a core outline of things that I wanted to talk about. And then I would improvise based on how I sized up the house and the person. Houses give clues to who people are and their values. And I got really good at it. So I mean, I was one of the top performers now. I wasn't the top, but I was one of the top performers in the office on the fundraising side. I recall being my quote every week. That's what I recall, but it was some time ago. But yeah, then I started picking up clues of like, okay, like if I see there'll be certain signs, like if I see a certain kind of car or a certain feature in the house, they'd be like, okay, that's my house. I'm gonna get $200 from this house. Um, things like a purple door, if you're wondering. If you see a purple door, then you might get some money from that house, depending on your political affiliation. So that was, I think that was what I learned there was that was my first exposure to anything that was customer facing in a sales role. And I just learned to be fearless in that role. In the role as a futures broker, the biggest takeaway I had was self-education and teaching yourself through teaching other people. So when I joined that role, I didn't know anything about finance. I had no financial exposure in school at all, and that's exactly why I was interested in the role. And again, I have this kind of academic bent, so I was like, okay, like I want to understand this conceptually. What am I getting into? And it was a very exciting time in the futures industry because you had a new futures exchange. There's a European financial exchange that was trying to break into the US market and build a futures exchange from scratch. And futures exchanges are, like many markets, they are valuable because people find them valuable. It's a self-perpetuating cycle where they offer the best liquidity and price discovery because people keep on coming back to it. So it's this virtuous cycle. And so it's very difficult to break into that. Well, so then, I went to the opening event and I wrote coverage of this event and I put together this blog with this horrible name, mindsandmarkets.com, because I want to talk about psychology and finance. Very embarrassing name. But so I started posting articles about these different aspects of the futures industry. And even after a handful of months, like I valued the New York Times and Wall Street Journal for years, but I would read their financial coverage of the futures industry and be like, oh, actually, you don't quite have that right. You're sort of right, but you're missing some key parts. And so I started writing this blog very consistently. And at the end of it, so I was actually leaving. I left the industry after about a year. I wasn't doing very well in the role. I wasn't finding success in that sales role. And then also I read a really interesting article by this guy, Robert Schiller, who's a professor at Yale, who explained, hey, you know what? This is in like June 2007. He said, by the way, there's a housing bubble, and here's all the components of it. Here's why we're facing a housing bubble, and here's the securitization component. That's why it's affecting the price here. And here's, who knows what might happen from this, but here's things to be concerned about. It's like, oh yeah, that is interesting. Boy, that is something that I'm concerned about. So the timing is perfect. I had this opportunity to go to Northwestern, and I was, had some concerns about the market. And I wasn't really making a lot of money in the role. But so the month that I had already decided to leave, a reporter from the New York Times and a reporter from the Wall Street Journal both reached out to me for comments on financial topics. So this is maybe a negative lesson of, if I wonder today what would happen if I just kept up that blog with the trajectory that was on and the ability to be, maybe that could have been like a nerd wallet kind of situation where there's some niche that I totally own, like the points guy or whatever. So it taught me the lesson of building an audience and publishing what you learn. And then it also taught me some things about finance. I learned about finance and learned about, okay, well, I am interested in money. I'd like to make some money. And then also the time at Northwestern, I worked with some really brilliant professors who were very scrappy. I think the one lesson that I'll reference, there's a number of lessons I learned. I worked with this one professor, Marianne Cheatham, who I believe is still a research professor today. She's probably in her late 70s. And she was career academic. This is the only job she ever had. She came to Northwestern for a PhD and stayed ever since. So at this point, that would be 50 plus years. And she's one of the most impressive people I've ever worked for, including, various smart, hardworking lawyers. One thing she impressed on me, we worked with a really challenging technique for studying hearing in mice, and involved a surgical procedure on the cochlea of a mouse. Cochlea is in your inner ear. And so however small you think the cochlea is in a mouse, it really is that small. It's a very small part of the mouse, and I had to perform a surgical technique on it that was very difficult. And Marianne told me heading into this, like, it's going to take you 6 months of practicing this twice a day before you're competent at this. And if I knew how daunting that would be, I didn't know how hard that would be. If I knew how hard that would be in the beginning, who knows what I would have thought. Maybe, hopefully I would have still pushed through. I'm sure I would have. But so, in the midst of this training, I was getting some proficiency, but still not very good. And there's a lot of things that can go wrong in this recording procedure, these different steps of recording. And so I finally got this mouse into the recording booth, and setting up the recording equipment, sat down, and we're not getting any signal. And so we're trying different things, and then Marianne came down to kind of supervise, and I was like, ah, yeah, this isn't working. And I was like, do you think it might be the equipment? Because equipment's pretty old and sensitive as well. And she said, she paused, she's like, Khurram, when something goes wrong in experiments, I always look to myself first. And that was such hard feedback to hear and so important. And I've never forgotten it since. I try to live up to that standard. When things go wrong, I try to assign some responsibility to myself. In any circumstance, even if I think somebody else is very much at fault, I try to take some responsibility because of what Marianne told me. So I think that's in highlights what I learned from those roles.
Yeah, I mean, listen, already you're speaking to the choir over here. I love to hear all of that. The fact that you got the New York Times reaching out to you, being like, "Hey, you got any comment on these new futures numbers or something like that?" I think that's just so amazing because you casually said it, just casually dropping it, and also working on mice ear. I mean, that's just insane. I'd never thought of doing that in my entire life. But I think from that, something you said before that I think was a very important sentiment when talking about being a futures broker is that you learn by jumping right into it, throwing yourself into the fire. What sort of advice would you have to people in terms of speaking more on that, in terms of learning, enhancing your learning, and getting better at things, just throwing yourself in the fire? Would you suggest that to people as you did yourself?
Yeah, and I think there's a controlled way to do that, which is, and it ties into something we've just talked about, which is this blog and what you're doing right now with the podcast. So I really admire you for putting yourself out there, and I think it's such a great idea to do that. Let's break down what you're doing here. So you're very early in your stage of exploring law, and so someone else in your shoes might say, oh, I don't know anything about law. I'm like far away from being a lawyer. I don't know anything. I don't know what am I going to talk to a lawyer about. I'm just going to embarrass myself. I don't know anything about it. But so you put yourself out there by sitting down and saying, okay, I can figure out what are key questions I can explore for a lawyer's career decisions. I've got a point of view, which is that there's not really a straight path through law. And I suspect if I ask questions around that, then I'll be able to pull up some ideas. So you're doing this, you're generating this podcast, and I've seen your guests, you got a great roster of guests. This is exactly the kind of thing that if you sustain this, even if you stop today, there's a ton of takeaways, but like if you continue sustaining this, who knows where your career will go from this. So I think things like this is in the hands of everyone. That's the amazing thing about this era with social media is that anyone can obtain an audience if you are sharing a valuable message. It's not difficult to share valuable messages based on personal experiences. Like Nate, you shared some of your personal experiences for your Fortune Wishes path here. So I think everyone has a unique point of view to share. So I think that's a way you can throw yourself into something. So if you're interested in changing what's the regulatory framework for AI going to be? No one knows. No one knows what that's going to be. And that's the beauty of it, is that you can identify something that you think is important, an irreversible trend. AI is an irreversible trend. And so if I start making intelligent commentary, say, well, I can look by comparison, look at the regulatory structure for the internet in the 90s and the relatively laissez-faire approach we took there. And I can speak to whether I think that'll be beneficial or harmful in regulating AI today. You can develop a point of view and just experiment and put out ideas out there. And then you'll find even very experienced practitioners will be deferring to you because in short order, you can become the expert. In a time when there's no experts, you can become the expert. So I think those are ways in which people can, that's the first thing that comes to mind when I think of the idea of throwing yourself into something in the field of law.
Yeah, I think well, first I have to say thank you very much for the kind words. I appreciate that, Horam. And of course, at the beginning of every episode, I say I'm the host for today and forever. I really mean it. I'll never, ever stop doing this. I love it too much. I would never. But I think something you said there that was really important is that you could become an expert in something very, very quickly. Sort of there's no one in the market who's being an expert maybe on AI regulation, like you said, as an example. And I think that's such an important point. And really the broader point is putting yourself out there, just getting down, doing it, posting on LinkedIn, posting on Instagram, whatever it may be. Just start. You can say I'll start tomorrow. No, start today, because that's where all the magic happens. But something you're talking about before, you're talking about mentors, you're talking about networking, how important. Now, I used to combine these questions, but I actually pulled them apart because I believe there are two very distinct questions with two very distinct answers. Now, can you talk about the importance of mentorship, how important mentorship has been throughout your career?
I'll say two things simultaneously that are maybe semi-contradictory about mentorship. Mentorship has been huge and essential in my career, and in some ways, mentorship I think is a pretty overrated concept for lawyers. So I guess I'll start with the overrated part because I feel like that's under discussed. So I think what a lot of lawyers, particularly in law school, think there's someone out there that's going to be my mentor. And there's these programs you have in law school where you're assigned someone, like, hey, you're going to connect with this alum and they'll come to this day, and then maybe there's some framework for how you'll stay in touch from there. And I think a lot of people think, oh great, that's how I'll find my mentor. Well, maybe. I mean, like, there was somebody who I had that sort of connection with at University of that he and I are still very friendly. And we actually worked together today. Like, as a recruiter, I work with candidates with him. Um, I think people underestimate how much, like we're just talking about, people can teach themselves, especially in places in areas of law that don't have it. There's no mentor for AI regulations or whatever. Who's going to mentor you? So what would a mentor even mean? And maybe a mentor would be, well, I helped pioneer laws. I was there when people formulating cybersecurity laws, and so I helped advise on policy around that, or I helped clients. I handled some key litigation of resolving the significance of this law or this regulation. So here's ways to think about new laws. They're definitely. I mean, it's really valuable to look at precedents and learn in that way. But I think people underestimate how much they can learn from themselves. They underestimate how much they can learn from peers. I think it's another thing that's really underrated in law school. I think a number of people talk about the importance of, like, hey, stay in touch with your peers, and then there'll be a benefit to that. One of the first people that I placed as a recruiter was a law school classmate. So I mean, the value of these relationships, you don't know where these are going to go. And so I think in those ways, I think mentorship is a little overrated. I'll also add that another challenge around mentorship is that it's just an apples to apples. The circumstance that led for one lawyer's success, maybe the market was completely different and they caught a wave. Pretty much every lawyer that graduated from 2013 on just rode this huge bull wave, and so there's tons of headwinds already in the economy. So lots of areas were just booming. So it's easy to look like a genius, for an area of law that's getting busier when it's just a function of the economy getting busier. So there's that aspect where someone's experience isn't identical. Another aspect is, like, maybe a little more granular about their law firm. Like, maybe conditions around their law firms change. Law firms have changed a lot in the past 5-10 years, particularly from what firms like Kirkland and Ellis have pioneered, where they've really expanded the growth of non-equity part of a law firm, and that really boosts profits without expanding the equity partnership. And so just the circumstances which led someone to make equity partners in the firm it's just completely changed at big law firms. And so their advice won't necessarily be as applicable. And then another area is in people's personal lives. I think something that's really remarkable to me as I've gotten older, I have a 15-month-old son. And when I talk to other lawyers who had been more like mentors, or just other lawyers that I know that are older, who are now more like friends, something that any number of more experienced lawyers have said to me is, whether they may use this word or not, but they have regrets or just feel differently about the time they spent away from their family. And so maybe the decisions, the values they have around work are completely different than the values that you have around work. So maybe they'll advocate for, oh, you should just definitely Here's a dilemma where there's this rainmaker who's looking to bring you in. You're already so busy, but like it's a great shot to work with this big shot partner. Yeah, you should definitely take them up on that and just overload your schedule, just push through. And you know what? That may not be right for you. You might have a completely different value around your longevity and well-being than that other partner did. And maybe that worked for that partner. And you know what? Maybe it didn't. Maybe that person's family life is a train wreck. You just don't know. Maybe they have an amazing life. I don't know. But the point is that you have to have some awareness of people's values to make sense of what mentorship would even look like. Okay, so that now that with all that caveating, which are I think very all important, I will say that I had wonderful mentors in law school. And there's like I had a great coach who coached me for mid court, who was definitely a great resource to me. Otherwise, professionally, he understood what my goal was to break into big law, and he supported me along the way. And I remember we were getting coffee one time. I was sitting down with him, saying, "Hey, you know what? I'm talking to all these lawyers. I'm doing all these things. Like I'm doing all. I'm reaching out to lawyers, talking to people. I've got a strategy in place. I'm being targeted. I'm being specific. I've got a clear vision of the kind of firm that would need my help, but just nothing's happening." And basically, he saw that I was just like emotionally drained. He said, "You know what? I get it. You're doing all the right stuff. Just keep going." It's exactly what I needed to hear. I just kept going and it worked. So, or another mentor who he was my coach for a appellate advocacy challenge for an of court that I was part of, and he was a wonderful mentor to me, and still is a great friend today. And he, I just got a text from today saying, "Hey, I've got a referral for you." So just this is a lasting friendship that we have now. I should also say that the director for the Center of Intellectual Property at the time at my law school, Michelle Bridges, who she's passed away, and I don't think I always expressed appreciation for her. I look back at my emails and I definitely expressed a lot of appreciation for her, but I wish I did even more because she was extraordinary for what she did for my career. She went to bat for me in a way that no one else ever did. And, she made introductions to me she had a great relationship with the chief judge of the Northern District of Illinois, who was on the board for the Center for Intellectual Property at my law school. She she made an introduction and spoke really favorably of me. And so on that basis, my grades weren't very good, but he gave me a shot. And then I got an externship with him. That was a turning point in my career. She helped me get a role at a firm that potentially could have led to an associate role. She also got me into the in of court that I've just mentioned that was for intellectual property. She did incredible things for my career. So yeah, mentors, particularly in law school, had a big impact on me.
Yeah, those were all fantastic points. I think as well, the fact that we can teach ourselves is a very, very important point to making, almost an epistemological point that we're making, not to get too philosophical. But the fact that we can teach ourselves, that we can expand our knowledge just through reading things. Because I think, like you said, we live in such an amazing era with social media and the internet itself. There's actually too much information at some points out there on the internet. And just like in starting this podcast, the first thing I did, just typed into Google how to start a podcast. And I went from there in terms of even recording, editing audio, finding out how to do those things. I was researching how to do like noise gate yesterday. I don't even know what that is, but now I do. And it took me, a couple of YouTube videos. And also, I have to say congratulations on your 5-month-old, on your 5-month-old child. I know I'm late to the party, but I always like to give my congratulations. And of course, just to tag along on your sort of mentorship tangent you went on there, another thing that I think is really underrated is that there's mentors out there that you actually don't have to meet. There's so many people who post on LinkedIn all the time. I mean, there's hundreds of thousands now. Since LinkedIn have really been putting a lot of time, effort, and money into sort of the creator economy, there's so many valuable insights that people can take away, and you don't have to reach out to them. You don't have to talk to them. You just consume their information and put it in your own frame, your own perspective. For me, I mean, Tim Ferriss, he literally like the first, if you look at my intro for this podcast, like half of it is Tim Ferriss. I just stole it. I literally just stole it. And I've never met Tim. I hope I meet Tim Ferriss one day, but I've never met him before. He was almost like a mentor to me. He taught me how to do a lot of this podcast. He taught me how to frame questions the right way and ask the right questions and dig deeper on things. So it's just something like that that I love so much about the internet. It just makes my life so much better and so much easier. But let's talk about those turning points in your life. Your judicial externship, you had two of them with Chief Judge James Holderman and Judge John W. Dara. And you also had a plethora of other experiences throughout law school. And my question here is, obviously, you seem to have a focus on intellectual property. How did you come to get to that focus? How did you figure out, okay, intellectual property is what I want to do, what I want to focus on?
Yeah, so well, actually, let me on the point you mentioned about who you can learn from virtually. I do want to pick up on that because I think you raised a really good point, which is a key part of learning isn't just from learning from people in law. Like if you're just pulling ideas from other spheres, that's going to be so valuable. And so I too have been very influenced by Tim Ferriss. And so with my podcast, I've taken his technique of starting out with a question that is familiar to the subject. They've a familiar story they have, so it's a great way to warm up with someone. So I've definitely copied shamelessly from other people and encourage more people to do the same. So yeah, so in terms of intellectual property, how I came to it, I headed into law school aware of patent law. I had there was a alumni of my college who happened to be the president of one of the most prominent patent boutiques, and so he was very generous and hosted events for the Carnegie Mellon alums. And he also was the first host for, he was the first time I was exposed to that IP in of court. He was my host for the first time I ever went to the event. From that, then I said, oh my God, I got to be part of this. And Michelle Bridges helped me out. So I had some exposure to patent law from there, and I saw, okay, this is interesting. And then I also had the professor I worked for, a couple of them had peers from their PhD programs who had ended up as patent agents or patent attorneys, and they'd spoken very favorably of patent law. So I was aware of patent law, but I said to myself, look, there's a reason why I'm not pursuing the sciences. Like I want to do something that's different. I'm much more interested in finance. Someone who I admired was Leo Melamed, who was the you would call him the founder, but he's one who grew the Chicago Mercantile Exchange from this provincial, small, local agrarian exchange into this financial powerhouse. And so he had a lot of degree, but he didn't practice. And so I said to myself, oh, well, I mean, maybe I could do something like that. So, but so I thought I might become like a derivatives lawyer after law school or something financial, because it'd be weird and niche to Chicago and I love finance and math, so I thought it would play well, and I'm sure it would have, except that I entered law school in 2010, which was the biggest crop of law students before or since in a rough economy. So I sized up and said, okay, no one's getting hired for transaction work right now. Litigation's what's busy right now, and then specifically patent litigation. Chicago happens to have a very strong Chicago patent litigation bar, and so my interest in patent litigation was purely mercenary. It was just like that was what was going to get me hired, and so then I just niched into that and started becoming more strategic with heading my career in that direction.
I would have to say the derivatives litigation is insane. I didn't even know that was like a possible thing anyone can do. I know very, very little about derivatives for a good reason though, because they're very confusing and there's a lot going on. It's a lot of equations. Actually, one of my brother's friends, he's actually a derivatives trader at Goldman Sachs right now, and I've asked him about it, and I walked away with nothing. I didn't understand anything what he was saying, but going forward, after law school, you were an attorney at Hulsa Neely. I'm very terrible with the names. And then you were an attorney at Goodwin. Now, this is a two-part question. So first, I have to ask, you mentioned value before, delivering value, how important that is. Can you describe in your own words what you think value is? And then, what sort of advice would you give to people who are becoming associates or junior associates and how they can deliver value for their law firms?
Did I talk about delivering value? Gosh. Let's see here. So now I got to come up with something intelligence about delivering value at your law firm. Well, I I had a conversation one time with the head of intellectual property at Polzinelli, and I'm trying to remember what the context we were talking about. I think I was approaching him with there's trying to advise a client on a litigation and on some aspect of litigation. And so I don't remember what the issue was, but I remember what he said to me was something to the effect of, we're of course paid to do legal work. That's obviously our job, but what we're really paid for is give our clients a peace of mind. Litigation is unpredictable. We cannot control the outcomes. Patent law is in many ways particularly unpredictable. And so the clients that we had were big enough, sophisticated enough to know that. They know that this is unpredictable. What they're looking for is some peace of mind that we have done everything we can to mitigate risks for them and make their lives easier. So I think that service orientation was very helpful to me. So I think that's the orientation that any of us can have. There's another partner of the firm who really stressed, hey, never just relay a fact. So let's say a doc entry comes in and the judge ruled on some discovery issue, or even let's say something even more factual. They set a schedule. Okay, so they set a schedule, just it's a bunch of dates and that. Okay, so then never just relay trial date set for blank. What your goal is to add some value to this transaction that shows your judgment and your brain work, which is, okay, how does this trial date compare to other trial dates in other cases? Will this impact any other parallel proceedings? Did the judge make any rulings on discovery deadlines that are different? Did the judge seem to indicate that some form of discovery wasn't necessary? There's always something you can be doing to contextualize a fact that's beneficial for your client. And so that's another way that we can always be thinking about value. And then when you internalize that principle, you'll see it everywhere, just in any course of life, even with your significant other or your family. You don't ever just repeat a fact. You always contextualize and add some value. And that's what we're all supposed to be here to do is help other people out that way.
Yeah, I love the contextualizing. I love that so much, just for the pure fact that it gives the layperson an ability to somewhat understand the legalese that is going on. That's something that is constantly talked about on this podcast in terms of value, allowing the client to figure out and have some sort of idea of what is even going on with their sort of situation, and if it's improving, if it's not improving, what's going on, what are the steps we're going to be taking soon. Having that transparency for people to see and have the ability to have peace of mind, like you said before. Now, when you were finished up at Goodwin in 2020, you had started Khurram's Quorum, which I love so much. I need to know, how did you come up with that name? And what's your podcast about? What do you talk about on there?
Yeah, this is hardcore pandemic times, and so I realized in the course of practicing law that I am a big part of law to me is the social aspects. And so, going back to my earliest training, when I joined this Inn of Court in Chicago, that really, I'm so fortunate I came from Chicago in that way, because Chicago has, I have exposure to bar associations in a number of cities. I think Chicago's got a particularly strong bar association culture, which, my pet theory is a lot of that is geography, that geographically all the law firms are clustered in a fairly short distance compared to places like New York, where law firms can be spread around throughout Midtown, or Boston. You've got Back Bay Financial District and Seaport, so it's harder for lawyers to all converge consistently. So very strong bar association culture, and I saw how beneficial it was professionally for lawyers. So I was able to connect with so many lawyers and learn from them, from these organizations. And I could see the long-term benefit to people that were more advanced than me in terms of clientele, and then in terms of finding new joining firms that are stronger fits for them. So I think that that orientation made a big impact on me. And then also the kind of work that I did was patent litigator, but the specific kind was something called Hatch-Waxman litigation, which is a kind of pharmaceutical patent litigation. And the patent bar is already, relatively small compared to all the other kinds of litigators out there. But then the Hatch-Waxman bar was even smaller. So you really would run into a handful of repeat players. You would be a opposite opposing counsel in any number of cases. And then also, because you've got a brand drug company, then a number of generic pharmaceutical companies seeking to make generic versions of it. Brand drug companies sues a number of generics, and then very often these cases get consolidated, so you're part of a joint defense group. So then you're getting exposed to all these other law firms and how they operate and how their clients work. So you have a lot of exposure to this small group of lawyers, so you really aren't very embedded in a bar. So I think that social component of law was always very important to me. And then also I'm South Asian, and so there's a South Asian Bar Association that was very active in Chicago and then also active nationally. So through these different organizations, these different aspects of my professional life, just the social aspect of being a lawyer is very important to me. So the pandemic was very hard on me. And I was always someone who liked being in the office. I was in the office 5 days a week, even when it was an option to be working remotely, whatever. I was just very happy to be in the office in a suit, whatever. So Khurram's Quorum came out of a desire of just sharing stories and connecting with people. And like I said, I had exposure to these other podcasts and seeing the power of media in that way. I had the prior experiences that I had. Early in the pandemic, I started posting for law students primarily to talk about the techniques that I used to break into a big law firm, because I didn't have a summer associate position at a big law firm. I networked my way into that. So I started sharing those techniques for all these law students that, the economy was going great, and then it just went from 100 to 0. So that did, that had a lot of attention, got a lot of traction. And so I was kind of seeing the power of social media and saying to myself, okay, I don't really know where this is going, but there's something to this. And so that's part of what led me to start this podcast. And then Khurram's Quorum, I mean, it's obviously, it kind of rhymes and it's absurd. And so it's some form of levity. So yeah, that's the, and I already mentioned Tim Ferriss and the influence that he had on the podcast. And so yeah, that's what led me to the podcast.
I mean, we talk about shamelessly stealing things. I've pretty much shamelessly stole everything I do here, quite honestly, from the way I speak to what I say to the graphics that I make. Everything is pretty much stolen. I will admit it here, but that's just all knowledge is. We're all just stealing from each other. That's why I love philosophy very much, is because everyone's just stealing from everyone else and sort of putting their own unique twists and unique perspective on each thing. I know a very big thing that I learned from one of my favorite teachers ever, Matthew Kirk. Shout out to him. He's still an adjunct professor. He's getting that PhD soon. But one thing he told me is when you look throughout Western philosophy, Western political thought, everything is a footnote to Plato. Everything goes back to Plato. You read something, you're like, oh, this is just Plato with a little spin on it, a little modern spin, the changing times, the changing culture. That's always my favorite part. But that sort of thought that there's so much knowledge out there and it parallels to all different industries. I think one of my favorite things about knowledge and when you share stories is that you find those parallels, you can find those principles, those first principles that can help you to get to success. And that's something that you're doing through Khurram's Quorum. And it also is a newsletter. And for everyone out there listening, wondering, where is this? It will be in the show notes below. Do not worry about it. But just last year, you were the founder of Freshwater Counsel. So what do you do there? How's that experience been opening up your own business?
Yeah, it's been pretty great. So I am a legal recruiter, and that's my own agency. And so I focus on litigation primarily, and then especially patent litigation nationally. Yeah, it's been amazing. I knew that there was some kind of entrepreneurship that I had in mind for myself some point in the future. It was very vague and indefinite. Heading into law, and I really admired people who built their own law firms. And so there was a prominent plaintiff's law firm in Chicago that was very successful, and I just really admired these lawyers that struck out on their own and bet on themselves. And I just didn't know what that looked like for me. And so then going through the practice of law, I discovered there's a lot of things that I enjoy about the practice of law. I really enjoy and miss the deep work involved, where I could just shut my door and work on a brief for a number of hours, and people would understand that. I'd be given that space to focus on that. But there's definitely parts about law that I didn't enjoy. I did enjoy things like expert reports. Like I found like I enjoyed lots of aspects that are technical cases, but I didn't enjoy minutiae of technical cases. Um, so I noticed that about myself early on, and then I looked ahead to see, well, what does it look like? I mean, the whole reason why I wanted to be in a law firm, like I mentioned earlier, was to make money, and I wanted to be. How you do that really is you're a partner in a law firm. Those are the people that are the ones who are compensated for generating that revenue, and it's easiest for them to raise business. It's just very difficult to do that as associate, and then you're not typically compensated very well as associate. So, okay, you want to make partner, but then I was noticing, I was talking to all these people who made partner, and there's such a clear pattern I noticed even from law school, which was you'd hear the same line again and again when I asked people like, how is it being partner? And I heard again and again, particularly from patent litigators that may be different in other areas, is I didn't appreciate that when I became a partner, how much sales and business development would be part of this role. And I just wanted to do the work. And in my head, when I'd hear this, something would scream. So I'm just like, I can't believe this. Like, I do the work so that I can become a partner and do the sales part and the business development. That's the interesting stuff there. The other stuff, not interesting. Sales stuff, interesting. But the way the law firms are currently structured is just it's inescapable that you have to make partner to do that. In order to become partner, you have to do all the things in litigation, even the things that you don't want to do. So that was a pretty unpalatable approach. But then, I realized that it is possible to, you can't have it all if you're willing to give some things up. And so I realized that I am willing, I can get the sales and business development aspect and focusing on networks and relationships. That's what I do as a legal recruiter, is just building relationships. And I realized that you can do that and separate and get that sort of sales and business development experience you have if you're willing to give something up. I think one way to look at it for legal recruiters is what we're giving up is status. So at a law firm, you've got this this law firm page. You've got a picture of yourself there in a suit. You've got this really impressive bio. You're paid well, and so you have a lot of status prestige in a way that you don't as a legal recruiter. But I've discovered I'm very happy with giving up that status for the flexibility and compensation. So yeah, I've really enjoyed launching an agency. In many ways, it was de-risked because I had the audience that I mentioned. I built an audience on LinkedIn. I had this podcast, and I had some newsletters for different niches in law where I'd earned trust and attention. So this wasn't me just winging it and starting from scratch. There was a foundation there. And then of course I had expertise as a patent litigator. So there's a variety of conditions that set me up for success. But yeah, it was definitely a hard first 6 months. It was very slow. And but then it kind of everything came together all at once and has accelerated from there. So yeah.
Well, it just further exemplifies what your one mentor told you when you were getting coffee, is that you just got to keep going. The exponential growth will eventually happen. I know a couple days ago, Tony Albrecht, who was a guest on this podcast, he had posted about me actually, which was very flattering. My face was all red when I was reading it, I'll be honest. But he had talked about the fact that in me doing this, I am expanding my surface of luck. The area of luck that is possible is when you keep doing, you keep adding it. Eventually, something is going to happen. Something good is going to happen. It's sort of that what you put out into the universe, you get back in some way, shape, or form, good or bad. But we talk about networking. We talk about relationships. How important has networking been? And I'll add this in as well. You are an advisor at Briefly, and I suspect that that had to do with the sort of networking and relationships that you built over time. So you could talk about both of those things.
Yeah, great points. Yeah, so I mean, I think networking, everyone's got their own little pet theory or approach to their practice. And so for me, I've taken a very network first approach. I think a skills first approach would be, hey, you know what, I'm betting on myself being so good that I'm somebody that people need to call upon because I have some specific expertise. And I definitely think it's important to have expertise for sure. And so I certainly am. I mentioned before my expertise as a patent litigator, in particular in litigation and generally, understanding both boutiques and big firms in litigation, what their strengths are. So that's definitely expertise that I have, but I've made a bigger bet on a network, which is I don't know what's going to happen in the future. I don't know what value my skill set will have in the future necessarily, but I bet I'm making a meta bet, which is my network will have a solution. There'll be something in my network that will, like, either my network, people in my network will be figuring something out as markets conditioned, and then I'll be able to learn from them. Or the network itself will also provide for me to say, hey, you know what, here's a path forward for you. Here's how you can help us, the network, in this next phase of this, whatever's happened in this market. So my network is diversified. It's not all my eggs in one basket. If I only focus on my own skill set, that would be putting a lot of eggs in one basket, which can have a huge payoff, bit of a risk as well. So I think for me, the network approach is essential, and I'm very much an advocate of it. It's how I broke into a law firm to begin with. So heading into my first semester, probably at that point, or my last semester of law school, at that point, I probably met with probably about, my background envelope is about 100 lawyers at that stage, where for coffee, lunch, whatever. And initially in a variety of practice areas, like I was exploring things like real estate and tax, and then kind of figuring out, okay, like, can I pull those off? It's like, okay, really it's going to be patent law. So then the bulk started being patent law. My last semester of law school, I still didn't have a job. So I did have, I was at a firm where there was a path to becoming a associate there, but I sized up that I made a calculated bet to say, I didn't want to bet on that kind of work. I want to bet on litigation, which I thought was higher margin and more interesting to me. So it was a risky bet, and I was walking away from what was perceived as a sure job. That, you know, there was some precedent for that from peers of mine in law school who did end up there as associates. So took that risky bet to look for a role as a litigator. So heading into last semester, that last semester I met 100 lawyers, and so pretty much every day I was in a suit. And it was just like, when I wore jeans, people were like, oh my God, you're in jeans. Like, this is what's going on. So I really beat the street that last semester. And I identified my criteria, which is, hey, I'm looking for firms that are partner heavy or senior associate heavy, that are missing junior associates. And in particular, ones that would be doing this hatch-wax litigation that I mentioned. And so then there was a partner at a firm that met the criteria, and I met him. And so out of the 200 or so lawyers I met in law school, he was lawyer 197. And so the techniques that I learned that I mentioned earlier from the political campaign and from working as the volunteer in my alumni chapter, I applied those to law. I was really awkward early on. No idea how to sit down and talk to a lawyer, or what to talk about, and how to ask them intelligent questions about themselves. And I just got a ton of reps in. I just kept on going at it. I would read Chicago Lawyer, Chicago Daily Law Bulletin every week. I'd be learning about moves that lawyers are making, like which lawyers are moving where. I was starting to ask questions myself. Okay, which firms have which kinds of clients? How strong are the relationships with clients? Is that a growing area? So, and then these are questions I would ask with people, and then get market intelligence in this way. And then I'd be able to share market intelligence with other people. Well, I've heard that this is happening, and what's your opinion of this? And then that became valued. So yeah, I think the networking component is essential. I mentioned the conferences that are the bar association I was part of, and some of these had conferences that I would go to, and I didn't get any direct benefit from those professionally early on, but like now I am. So relationships that I created from years and years ago that didn't have any purpose other than the inherent enjoyment of getting to know someone now have a professional benefit. So I think networking is I know I'm using the word a bit here, but I find it useful. I think it is underrated, and I think more lawyers should take it seriously. And I talked to lawyers who are very successful. I had a conversation recently with a very successful lawyer, a partner, and this partner was saying to me, "Look, I had for the past dozen or so years only focused on work, and now I'm a partner, and I'm looking around and thinking of business developments." And otherwise just my inherent want to connect with people, and I just don't know a lot of people. I want to meet people now, and I know that it would have been different if I'd sustained this over these years, but I got to start now. And that's a common story. I think a lot of lawyers who I talked before about focusing on your own self as a skill set, that can be valuable, but it's a risky bet. And then once it's consummated as a partner, then you have to figure out some way to monetize that, shall we say, in business development. And if you don't have relationships, it's difficult to do that. So it's a precarious spot to be in. So yeah, I think networking is very underrated at all levels of practice: law student, associate, partner, and whatever analyze you have in government or whatever else you want to look at. So yeah.
Law students, are you feeling overwhelmed, stressed, or short on time in law school? Maybe you just want someone to show you a step-by-step framework to master the topics you're learning in your classes. I know the pressure you're under, and I've got the perfect solution for you. My course, The Law School Operating System, is proven to help you conquer law school with confidence and ease.
Created by Lisa Blasser, a former guest on the podcast and founder of the Law School Success Institute, this course breaks down every subject into manageable main topics that you run through a comprehensive study system to thoroughly prepare you for class and final exams. No more feeling like you need to know everything all at once in the beginning.
But that's not all, Nate. The Law School Operating System also teaches you how to schedule your studying and time effectively. For every topic, you'll know which study step you're on and when you'll complete it every week of your semester. No more mad dash cram sessions, more time with your loved ones. And with my system, you'll walk into your exams knowing you've given 100% of yourself, that there's nothing more you could have done to succeed, and there's no better confidence than that.
Lisa breaks it down like this: one class, one list of main topics, and one system to master each topic. With recorded and live sessions for students available on her website and partnerships with law schools nationwide, the Law School Operating System is here to help you thrive from day one to the final exam. Ready to take control of your law school journey and operate at your full potential in law school? Visit www.lisablasser.com today and enroll in the Law School Operating System. Be sure to use code LSOSNATE10 at checkout for 10% off the recorded course. That is code LSOSNATE10 at checkout. Now, back to the show.
Yeah, I think one of the most fascinating parts right now is I'm so interested in the sort of framework that you're using. You keep saying the word bet. It's a very finance background, but also one of my favorite things to do. I love playing poker. I'm a year in, not very good at it. Still learning, gotta read the whole board, see what's going on with everyone else. It's a learning experience, but I'm really enjoying it, honestly. I love playing with my friends. And something it sounds like big inspiration. I know someone who's huge in the poker world and just in the mindset world is Annie Duke, who I read her Substack every so often, but she always talks about hedging your bets. And the greatest bet, something that one of my favorite people ever, Alex Hormozy, why I'm wearing a hat right now, probably. I didn't even think about that. But he always says that the greatest bet you can ever make is bet on yourself. Because if you're capable, if you're ready to do it, you're going to make that bet. It will come into fruition. So I just love the framework that you're using. It's very poker-esque, very finance background, sort of built upon that. So I love that very much. I'm going to steal it, actually, Horm. I'm going to steal it. But Homer, down to our final 5 questions. The first of the questions is, throughout my entire journey doing this podcast, I have seen that the law is moving in a certain direction. The traditions of the old are now turning into new traditions of these new technologies, these new softwares, these new AI products. So this is sort of the tech stack question per se, but what sorts of things do you use in your daily life or at your company that help you cut that overhead, be more efficient in terms of AI products or new software products you would recommend to people?
I mean, I'm loving ChatGPT, of course, as everyone is, and the latest version is out, and it's so fast and it's so powerful, and there's just lots of there's lots of questions I have, like if I'm thinking through, if I have questions about how equity partnership could be, like I just threw a question in yesterday to say, hey, make a proposed agreement for how equity partners can develop a modified lockstep that's based on seniority and origination, and it came out with an intelligent response that is a good foundation for forming a partnership agreement. So I just think, of course, we're just scratching the surface for potential there. My tech stack's pretty modest. There's software that I use for firm intelligence that I have. There's software I use for patent litigation that I use that I enjoy. So my software needs are pretty modest. I honestly, so much of my work is pretty old school. It's just lots of phone calls and conversations. I don't actually use Zoom much at all. I'm on calls mostly. So in many ways, I'm surprisingly old school.
Well, I love to hear that. I love ChatGPT. I've known about ChatGPT for years because I'm a big Sam Altman fan. So I've been following that ever since I think my senior year of high school. So I've been using it throughout my entire college career. I love playing around with it. I love asking it questions. I love taking a deep dive into it. I know people are now starting to have like full conversations, sort of having the Socratic dialogue with it. I love it so much because it's like I'm sauntering with it, which is like walking around talking, which is something that Plato talks about. And there's that other guy. I can't think of his name. He's the American guy. But they always talk about talking and walking is the best way to figure out your solutions for things. So I love ChatGPT. It's amazing. Obviously, it's a tool. There's some downfalls. There's always going to be some pitfalls with technology, but I am all in for ChatGPT. Now, my next question number 4, is live on the Lawyers in the Making podcast. Khurram, what are your book recommendations for people? Doesn't have to be about law. It can be just your favorite book, something you give a gift to someone.
The first thing came to mind that I think is more obscure and hopefully more helpful is Finite and Infinite Games by James Carse. And it's difficult to describe this book. It's just very different than other books you'll probably have read. So there's this concept of finite games where so finite games include things like a game of football, where there are defined rules and you can define what it means to win. But then he goes on to show that lots of other things in life follow finite. Once you abstract away the features of a finite game, you find that lots of things can be characterized as a finite game. So things like partner law firm in many ways is a finite game. So it defines property as something that is retrospective about what you've done rather than prospective. He just has these really powerful ways to think about very fundamental concepts in our society. But the most important concept he proposes is an infinite game. And the only rule of an infinite game, or the key rule, is that an infinite game is played solely for the purpose of perpetuating play. Like that is what it means to win the game, is for the game to go on. So for you, your infinite game is this podcast. You said in the beginning, this is your host forever. You're playing an infinite game with your audience and with yourself. Things like a yoga practice is an infinite game. You are playing a game with this yoga instructor who you're giving some power to in order to, for the purpose of stimulating you and guiding you. And then you're playing a game with yourself to challenge yourself as you progress. The world is full of infinite games, and the goal is to cultivate those and make sure that your career, among other things, follows an infinite game, that you are playing solely for the purpose of playing. And that's how I view my legal career today. One of the hallmarks I know is that if there's something difficult or challenging in my role, I don't shy away from saying, oh God, I'm dreading doing this. I get excited about it and take that heads on. That is a signal to me that, okay, I've chosen an infinite game in working as a legal recruiter.
Yeah, honestly, I'm fascinated by that. I'm buying that book today. It just sounds fascinating. Because I've always thought about that my entire life, one of my favorite books as well, which is I wouldn't say very similar, but The Myth of Sisyphus, the fact you got to keep pushing the rock up the hill and it just falls down. It's sort of that idea of that infinite game is that the idea is you should enjoy pushing that rock up the hill. You have to enjoy the most of it because it is pretty much all we have. My least favorite infinite game is doing the dishes. Absolutely. It's perpetual. It's like I walk in, I'm like, I can't believe there's dishes in there. Now I have to do dishes. So I always thought about it in that way. And it's interesting that there is a book out there that actually applies those sort of principles. I am super interested now. But my third to last question here, what are the sorts of things you consume, not food, consume on a daily basis, either that be through social media, so X, Instagram, LinkedIn, Substack, YouTube, Reddit, Facebook. I think I got them all this time. Wow, impressive. I always forget one. But what is crossing the transom of Khurram's mind on a daily basis? And if you have any suggestions of people you like on LinkedIn, you suggest, or some Substacks or podcasts as well that you enjoy listening to, anything like that.
I think I'm gonna have a really disappointing answer, which is, to be honest, in the past year or so, my consumption of all forms of media has really plummeted. And so I don't know if I have very intelligent recommendations there. I mean, I use LinkedIn professionally, so I certainly am on there. So I post pretty much every weekday and often comment on other people's posts as well. And I don't want to forget anyone that I would say to follow LinkedIn, so I'd rather probably just maybe in the show notes I can mention some names. I think that'd be good to follow. And then I have enjoyed Twitter in the past because of how eclectic the ideas on there. I think it's pretty extraordinary, some of the talent that's on there. And I've had very mixed feelings about growing on there and investing in that platform because it's also very distracting. As it happens, a week and a half ago, I deleted Twitter from my phone, and I've noticed that I actually haven't been on at all, not even on my browser since then. And I can't say that I feel like I don't feel some like transformative change. Maybe I need to give it 2 weeks or something like that to see, but it probably has been nice to have that clarity of either focusing on work or doing something else. So yeah, I hate to disappoint, but I don't know if I've got a very interesting set of answers for anything to consume right now. Yeah.
Any podcasts?
I mentioned Tim Ferriss. I have enjoyed his podcast for sure. And something that I think is very stimulating, but I think you have to use your judgment for what to listen to and take away from it is My First Million. It's very entertaining. I think the podcast hosts are very very passionate about what they do, very enthusiastic, and also very good at being eclectic thinkers and very good at talking about the limits of their knowledge. And so those are all things I admire. And so they're very resourceful. And so I think there's lots of great ideas for entrepreneurship that you can hear from that podcast.
Sam Parr and Sean Purry. Those are my people right there. I love My First Million. I almost bought a t-shirt the other day, even. They almost got me to buy a t-shirt, but they have fantastic episodes. That's one of my favorite podcasts. I try to listen to every single one. They have so many interesting guests. Nowadays, they're really, really pushing the limits now. I know they just had oh my God, I'm forgetting his name, but he's the Palantir guy. And that was a really, really interesting episode. They had a couple other people that I just really, really enjoy, and I am blanking on their names right now. But that is definitely one of my biggest podcast recommendations. Like you said, in terms of entrepreneurship, there is so much you can learn. I know Scott Galloway, actually, his most recent episode was really, really, really good. I enjoyed it tremendously. He was being all raw and honest, and that's what I love so much. But, Khurram, second to last question here. You got Clearwater. You got Briefly, you're doing all this stuff, but what does an ideal Friday night and Sunday morning look for Khurram?
Let's see here. Friday night. Let's see. I'm trying to think what my wife and I usually do. Well, I usually cook, so I think that's definitely on the menu. I think probably mostly my wife and I watch a movie after we put our son down. So I think that's our typical Friday evening. Sunday morning, well, on Saturday mornings, we typically go to yoga and then go to Whole Foods afterwards to have lunch and then load up on groceries. And then sometimes we do the same on Sundays, but then what we're often doing is getting outside. Like, yesterday we got outside and went to a park nearby with our son, and then got some then I made lunch at my in-laws place, and we also had dinner there as well, that because we had Sunday dinner there. So yeah, I think it's usually just outdoor time, often exercise, and then yeah, time with my wife and my son.
This is a terrible question to ask, but you got any favorite movies? But give me, if you have a top three. I don't know if you think about it as much as I did.
Yeah, you know what? I'm getting back to watching movies again, and so I rewatched one of my favorite movies this past week, which is The Virgin Suicides. It's just one of the most atmospheric movies. It's just got an incredible soundtrack. Every aspect of the film is amazing. So I really love that. And I actually just rewatched Godfathers 1 and 2, which I didn't know how much that would hold up for me over time. It's been a number of, I've watched it many times, but it's been a few years since I've watched it. And I didn't know how much my values had changed or whatever, but there was still like a lot I got out of it, and those are still excellent movies. So I guess that's my three.
Yeah, I mean, I got The Godfather. I mean, come on, that's one of my favorite movies ever. I love one of my favorite movies ever because it's so philosophically deep. I love Parasite. That's one of my favorite movies ever. It's just there's so much to it, and every time you watch it, you learn something new. It's like a really good book. But
I should rewatch it then.
it's so spectacular, and the fact they live, I won't go into it. But last question here, Horm. I do this at the end of every episode. What are your words of wisdom for the aspiring law students, the current law students, and the legal professionals out there in the world?
I think bet on yourself and keep going.
Perfectly said. Beautifully said. One of the shortest words of wisdom in history, but it's jam-packed. It's poetic. I love it. But Horm, that's the episode. That's the podcast. So thank you so much for doing this, coming on here, spreading your wisdom and spreading your experiences. And for everyone out there listening, thank you for tuning in. And check us out, lawyersinthemaking.substack.com, lawyers in the making, one word, substack.com. And I will see you all in the next one.